Hey everybody, NecroVMX here, and today we're going to be taking a look at the James Bond novels. There have been a lot of novels over the years, and actually there's 43 of them as of 2009. It's quite a lot. There's also been some spin-offs, such as the Young Bond series and the Moneypenny Diaries, and some unpublished stuff and some unofficial stuff. But for today, we're just going to look at novels in the official series. Of course, the series started with Ian Flemming's very first novel, Casino Royale. Fans of the movies are probably most familiar with the recent film starring Daniel Craig, although it has been filmed twice before. Once as a spoof back in the 60s, and in the 50s it was broadcast live on television. The Casino Royale, the book, well, the movie that probably follows it the closest is the very first one, the black and white one, although that does change a lot of things. If you like the recent movie, you'll definitely dig the book, so you might want to check that out. The second book was Live and Let Die. This was eventually made into a movie starring Roger Moore, and if you saw it, you probably know what it's basically about. But Live and Let Die, the book, was also a big part of the movie License to Kill, so if you like that one also has a huge part of Live and Let Die. The third book, which is one of my favorites in the whole series, is called Moonraker. Moonraker was also made into a movie starring Roger Moore, and that was the one with all the space battles and lasers and shit. Yeah, I don't know where they were going with that. But the book is awesome. The book is actually about a missile called the Moonraker, and this guy, Hugo Drax, who owns it, and Bond is sent to investigate possible sabotage. But there's this whole plot, and I don't want to give away the ending because I think you guys should read it. Moonraker is probably my favorite James Bond book, at least so far. The fourth novel is called Diamonds Are Forever. Now, this was also made into a movie. This is the movie with Sean Connery. And the movie was kind of a comedy, and it was really silly. If you remember my review, I didn't really like this one so much. The book actually is awesome, though. You can tell that there's elements of the book in the movie, but they definitely cocked it up. Check out the book if you want to read a really good one. At number 5 is From Russia with Love. The movie version of that pretty much follows the book, although the book definitely focuses on Red Grant a lot more than the movie does. The whole first half of the book is basically about Red Grant and Smersh, so you should definitely check that out. Of course, the movie version had Blofeld and Spectre, but those weren't yet introduced or even created in the books yet, so it's all about Smersh and the communists. The sixth book is Dr. No. Now it's interesting, in the movie version of Dr. No, which was the first Ian films, they mentioned that Bond's gun, a Beretta, had jammed up on his previous mission and caused him to spend a lot of time in the hospital. They were actually referring to From Russia with Love, even though they hadn't filmed it, and ironically they would film that one next. Dr. No's a pretty good book. Anyway, next is Goldfinger. The movie Goldfinger actually follows the plot of this pretty well, so all things considered, you're probably pretty familiar with this. Ian Flemming's next novel was called For Your Eyes Only. This one's not actually a novel, but a collection of short stories. The short stories in this are From a View to a Kill, For Your Eyes Only, Quantum of Solace, Risico, and The Hildebrand Rarity. A couple of these were made into movies. The title of From a View to a Kill was used for A View to a Kill, but that really had nothing to do with the story. For Your Eyes Only was made into a movie, and they used the title of Quantum of Solace for the latest version. Elements of Risico have shown up in a couple of James Bond movies, most particularly The Living Daylights, and The Hildebrand Rarity. Well, there is a little bit of that in License to Kill, and there's some rumors that they might do a version of The Hildebrand Rarity for the next James Bond movie, though I really don't know if that's actually going to happen. Next came Thunderball. Now, Thunderball, there's a lot of controversy because originally it was based on a screenplay written by Ian Flemming and Kevin McClory, and another guy, too. So technically, this is the first novelization, since it was based on a screenplay for a movie that never got made. They made 2 movies out of this, Thunderball and Never Say Never Again. If you're familiar with those 2, well, that's pretty much the plot of this one, although the book is, of course, way better than both versions. Although, if you're going to pick a movie version, you gotta see the original, because Never Say Never Again sucked ass. Number 10 is The Spy Who Loved Me. This is the only Ian Fleming novel that was never turned into a movie. Sure, there was a movie called The Spy Who Loved Me, but it actually had nothing to do with the book at all. Rumor has it that Ian Flemming didn't like this one so much, and actually the book really doesn't have all that much to do with James Bond. He only shows up in the second half of the book. The next book is On Her Majesty's Secret Service. An interesting thing about this one, the movie followed the book almost for the word. I mean, this is the closest they ever came to adapting one of the books perfectly. You know how in the movie Blofeld and Bond meet each other, and, well, Blofeld doesn't recognize Bond even though he's met him before in, the previous movie? Well, there's a reason for that. This was the first time that he met Blofeld. Blofeld was a character in Thunderball, but he hadn't met Bond. He met Bond for the first time in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which took place after You Only Live Twice in the movies. The next book is You Only Live Twice, which is the last in the Blofeld trilogy, which is Thunderball, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and You Only Live Twice. Bond actually kills Blofeld in this one and loses his memory. Which brings me to the next book, The Man with the Golden Gun. Bond is an amnesiac in this one, and is trying to recover his memory. He actually tries to kill M because he's been brainwashed, and they have to send him after this guy, the Man with the Golden Gun, Scaramanga, to try and get his skills back. It's pretty interesting. Next came Octopussy and the Living Daylights. This is another collection of short stories that is sometimes just called Octopussy. The original version of the book just contained Octopussy and the Living Daylights, although later versions contained The Property of a Lady and 007 in New York. Octopussy and the Living Daylights were both made into movies, and The Property of a Lady was basically the movie Octopussy. 007 in New York hasn't yet been filmed or even mined for material, so that's interesting. Hopefully we'll see that sometime, though I doubt they'll use that title. Now, this is interesting because Ian Flemming actually died before The Man with the Golden Gun came out, and a lot of people think that he didn't really finish it, and that it was finished by a guy named Kingsley Amis. Well, whether that's true or not, Kingsley Amis actually wrote the next James Bond book, Colonel's Son, and he wrote it under a pseudonym, Robert Markham. That's in 1968. Keep in mind that Casino Royale came out in 1953, so these books have been coming out pretty regularly. It was a long time before the next book came out, 1977, and it was a novelization, James Bond, The Spy Who Loved Me by Christopher Wood, which is based on the movie The Spy Who Loved Me. In 1979, Christopher Wood returned to write the second novelization, James Bond and Moonraker. Christopher Wood only ever wrote these two books, and he never wrote any books that weren't based on a movie. It wasn't until 1981 that the next real James Bond movie came out, License Renewed by John Gardner. You know how in the first Austin Powers movie, Austin Powers put himself in cryogenic sleep so he can come back and fight Dr. Evil again? Well, that's kind of what happened with John Gardner in License Renewed. He had Bond basically go to sleep and come back in the 1980s, but not aged. It's kind of weird, but it updates everything for the 1980s and keeps it in continuity with James Bond's previous novels by Ian Flemming and Kingsley Amis. I'm just going to run through the rest of John Gardner's novels. Next came For Special Services in 1982, and then Icebreaker, and that came out in 1983. So you can see that they were starting to come out pretty quickly. This was followed by Roll of Honor in 1984, and Nobody Lives Forever in 1986. 1987 saw No Deals, Mr. Bond, and 1988 saw Scorpius. Win, Lose, or Die came out in 1989. This was followed by the novelization of License to Kill, which I mentioned in the License to Kill review. He had to have Felix Leiter get named by a shark a second time, because he was keeping it all having to do with the original books. Now, in 1990 came Broken Claw, and then in the next year, The Man from Barbarossa. Then came Death is Forever in 1992, Never Send Flowers in 1993, Seafire in 1994, GoldenEye in 1995, which was based on the movie, and Cold, which was John Gardner's last James Bond novel. The series was then picked up by Raymond Benson, who wrote 0-10 in 1997. He then wrote the novelization for Tomorrow Never Dies, The Facts of Death, High Time to Kill, the novelization of The World Is Not Enough. Then came a series of 3 books referred to as the Union Trilogy, Double Shot, Never Dream of Dying, and The Man with the Red Tattoo. You can often get those 3 as a single omnibus called the Union Trilogy. He finished it up with the novelization of Die Another Day in 2002. The series then took a hiatus, and it wasn't until just last year, 2008, that we got a new James Bond novel by Sebastian Faulks. It's called Devil May Care, although he's writing it as Ian Flemming. This is an interesting one because it ignores all the books by Kingsley Amis, John Gardner, and Raymond Benson, and takes place right after The Man with the Golden Gun, so it takes place in the 1960s. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I do look forward to it. Unfortunately, Sebastian Falk said he won't write another Bond novel, so we'll have to see if the series does return. Well, anyway, that's a look at the books. We'll see you tomorrow when I'm going to take a look at the James Bond video games.